Hi, good morning. This is Al Filreis. It's not good morning for all of you because Alan and Judy Norman are watching from Phnom Penh, where it must be 1 a.m. Alan and Judy, stay up, brew the coffee. I can't remember. I don't think I've ever been as excited about a Zoom session. It's about to the one that's about to happen, which is qualified, Hilton, by the fact that how many of them have there been, in the last year. But still, I don't mean to qualify it. I'm incredibly excited.
It's okay. You can qualify.
No, I don't want to qualify. I've been thinking about this all night, and here we are. I'm very excited. Thank you for coming back for what amounts to a third session with us as a Writers House Fellow, Hilton. Thank you. Really so delighted by this. So having you as a Writers House Fellow is a dream. And when we scheduled it, we were kind of hoping we'd be able to do it in person, but we've made a promise that we will rectify that soon and have you back in Philly. So thank you from the start and also at the end. And I just wanted to point out that Lily Applebaum is here, and I always say she's the best, all capital exclamation, but isn't she? She just gets it, totally gets it together, and has coordinated Writers House Fellows for a number of years now. And thank you, Lily, for your excellentness always. And I know you have a thing to say in advance of today's show. And then what you're going to do is you're going to be in the Zoom background picking up questions. So this is a chance for me to say to the many people who are watching from around the world that this will be partly an interview conversation between Hilton and me, but also I'll be passing along some questions from you, those who are watching. And Lily's the one who will pick those up. And so we'll do a mix. So we hope you'll have some good questions, aside from just saying good morning and greetings to Hilton. And feel free, if you have a favorite piece that you've written, that you've read by him, to post that in there too. All right, Lily, do you want to say something about a special deal we have for people?
Yes, I want to say thank you to everyone who is watching with us this morning or who may watch the recording at a later date. I am very excited to say it's a repeat if you were tuning into the reading last night, but we are partnering with Mary Tassilo at the Common Press to print fellows postcards, one for each month of the series and each month of the spring semester. So if you would like to receive a Hilton Als letterpress printed postcard, snail mailed to your very house, you can send an email to the Writers House Fellows email address, which is whfellow, FELLOW, at writing.upenn.edu, and send your mailing address, and we will be so glad to send you a postcard, just as a small thank you for being with us and a nod to our series, always having some printed ephemera in collaboration with the Common Press. So I will put that address in the YouTube chat as well. And then I just wanted to repeat what Al said about if you have a question or would like to share maybe a favorite piece of Hilton's that you really treasure and would like to share that, just post in the YouTube chat and I will be there.
Thanks, Lily. And Caroline Ruston, who's a poet performer extraordinaire, writes, excited for round 2. A lot of people who were with us last night are back again. And Zach Hardner, thank you very much. You're in the background doing all the tech. Greetings to Eliza Fisher. It's a little early for Eliza. It's 8:10 a.m. But thanks for all your efforts as coordinating this, Eliza. And also a shout out to Anthony Elms, who I know is here and is a colleague of Hilton's. And we're all big fans of what Anthony does at the ICA here in Philadelphia. Thanks, Lil. So Hilton, yesterday, I think one of the exciting moments for me, at least, was when, I don't know, I translated your comment that about Toni Morrison, calling her a high modernist, capital H, capital M, and then I said snarkily, or I thought it was snarky, I think you're also a high modernist, or at least you were thinking at that moment that might apply to you. So this is what leads me to my first question. You in the essay "You and What Army," which by the way is a kick-ass essay. Holy cow! Everything is in that essay, and I highly recommend it to everyone who reads.
It's actually a short story.
Yeah, it's a short story because, of course, you are inventing the voice of
Yes.
Richard Pryor's sister.
Yes.
And she says some amazing things. And one of the amazing things is where I want to start today. She says that being a Black American, I make of English what I will. And she qualifies that slightly by saying, I have made of English a form of American that other Americans don't speak, which is essentially the experimentalist, I want to say modernist urge of making language anew.
Yes.
And then she says the most amazing thing, and she's of course a voice artist. She does voices for porn films, and she's
I love her so much.
she's a professional voice artist. And she said she connects the Black voice, and I'm using that phrase. She doesn't use that phrase. She just says, as a Black American, I make of English what I will. And says that I think the best vocal interpreters of Gertrude Stein, I got as soon as I saw Gertrude Stein, I got my yellow Sharpie out and I identified it.
I think you'll be happy with what I'm writing now, because it's all about Stein's influence on Hemingway, which goes unremarked often.
This is the piece you're writing for the New Yorker now that you've just finished.
Because the Ken Burns documentary on Hemingway is coming out.
And you mentioned it during this discussion with the students, I believe. So everybody look out for that. But so Richard Pryor's sister says, I think the best vocal interpreters of Gertrude Stein's work are people like me, since we get her form and her brilliant protracted insight that American makes no sense to begin with. So my question for you is, what does it mean for this character, or for you for that matter, to get her form as a Black American who has made English necessarily an American thing that other Americans don't speak?
Yes, I think that she, well, there was something that was wonderful when I was reading about Four Saints and Three Acts, which of course is the collaboration of Stein and Thompson in a wonderful opera. One of the things that Thompson said was that the cast, which was an all-Black cast, understood the text without really having to ask questions. And it seems to me that if you are, the diaspora teaches you how to speak the language of the country that you're in and to make something different out of it. And I think that Stein, I love her so much. She did a monumental job in terms of dismantling conventional language so that we could see thought. That's really what she was interested in, what does thought look like on the page. And so I think that character in the story has an intuitive understanding that we Black people are living with borrowed language. And if we're living with borrowed language, we have the freedom and also the right to make of it what we will, because it's not ours. And our stay in this country or any other country is borrowed time, really. And so I think that she's talking about how we are really refugees here.
Yeah. It puts me in mind of Achebe just getting started writing his second book in 1960, where he read, I guess it's 1964 that he wrote this. He read Baldwin on Shakespeare and Achebe decided to stick with English. And he said that what I need to do is make of English, quote unquote, unheard of sounds.
Wow.
Which he got from Baldwin, who was trying to reconcile himself with Shakespearean English. So it kind of all circles back.
Oh, I'd love to read that. I don't know that.
Yeah, I'll send you the essay. Yeah, it's Achebe. I think after the first novel, Nigeria becomes independent in 1960. And so I think he was mildly attacked at the beginning for having chosen English.
Oh, I see.
And he was trying to explain just sort of what you said, Prior Sister is saying, which is that we're going to have to make a different sound out of it. In the Best American Essays intro, you quote Elizabeth Hardwick saying something about the essay as a form that, I know I'm making a little bit of a leap here, but that it's a slithery form. And either you or she, I don't have my notes quite right, say the essays, this is you, the essays I'm attracted to are essays that have something unfinished about them, a circle that cannot be closed. And I riffed a little when I read that, Hilton, and thought, okay, I think Prior Sister is saying something about the Black voice in Stein and the openness of the form. And then in a different context, you're saying something about the essay as a form, which is kind of the equivalent of the form that Prior Sister gets at the level of genre. Do you think of the essay as kind of aligned with what you've been saying about Stein?
I think that we're living at a time where the essay is not only essential but representative of the ways in which we think and talk. We are much more, obviously, a much more inclusive culture than we used to be. We're polylingual, we're polymorphous in many ways that our predecessors were not. So that, for instance, I remember being on a panel with a writer, and I was talking about how the form is now incorporating fiction and going back and forth between nonfiction and fiction, and how that was attractive to me. And the writer was an older writer, and she was very upset by my support of this. And I could see that in the rigidity of her point of view, life, like the essay, could only be one thing for her.
Mm-hmm.
But now, with brilliant students that, for instance, you had yesterday, there is an acceptance of a greater acceptance of possibility of what language can do. There's a greater questioning of what language can do. And so all of that really can go into the essay and shape the essay.
So, I mean, not to be too strident about it at all, because you're never strident about these things. I think the essay may be the apt form for this unfinishedness and unruliness, you know, about this polyvocal situation. It may be. Certainly it served that for you.
Yes.
Do you have your, by the way, somebody asked where we can find you and Whose Army, and it's simply in White Girls. It's a long essay, and it follows a prior love. It follows the somewhat more formally conventional essay about Richard Pryor, and the pair of them is amazing. So that's the answer to that bibliographical question. Do you have your Wallace Stevens book nearby still?
I do. I love him. He's always near at hand.
Same with me. I have a. So I guess we're going from.
And what about your book about Wallace Stevens? I can't wait to read it.
I'm gonna send it to you. You just have to let me know where to send it. You, in Tris Tropiques, you write brilliantly about Stevens, and you actually go so far as to do something no one has done in the critical literature of Stevens, which is to actually try to say what Stevens teaches us through the poem So-and-so reclining on her couch. You actually say, nervous, what's the word? With nerve.
No,
what
con brio.
You say, what Stevens taught us. So it's about the muse, and that is to say what you're writing in that essay. But of course, Stevens is writing about the muse. It's his model. It's a painter's model lying on the couch. Yeah. And here's what you say Stevens teaches us in this poem. This is about the most complicated thing I have read, period. I might read it twice because I'd love for you to explain it. Here's what Stevens taught us. Quote, this is you. The muse is as open to suggestion as the artist who learns from the muse's receptivity.
Yes. Well,
I hear-
it's like this. Like when you look at something, or when you are in the company of another person whom you like, or you want to get something from, or that you're nourished by, you have to be open to what the subject is giving you. So for instance, Diane Arbus, great artist, used to say that she didn't ask the subject to arrange themselves. She arranged herself to suit the subject.
Yeah.
So it's similar to that. What I think Stevens was saying, and what I'm saying in that essay in particular, is you have to be open to what the model is giving you. And then when you have that kind of openness, exchange of information. So the model is saying one thing and you're hearing it and you're responding. It's not just someone, as Mrs. So-and-so lying on her couch.
Mrs. Papadopoulos.
Yes, it's actually something much more beautiful and complicated about the openness of the model.
So
and where that can take you.
Yeah, and it's an intersubjectivity. Everybody, both are a subject there, and that's,
yes.
I won't say that's new theoretically to the issue of the muse, but it is an open-hearted interpretation of Mrs. Papadopoulos, who in the joke of the end of that poem is the model who's been hired for the day, and now it's time for her to go. And you follow that in this.
But also she stays in memory, right?
She absolutely does.
She has to go, but she stays in memory forever.
Your not the Marie who was your mother, but the Marie who was your part Jewish, part Puerto Rican girlfriend whom you just adored. We go from that passage about Stevens to Marie, and that's a relationship of hopeful intersubjectivity and love. Here's what Stevens says, just in a few lines, and I'd love to get your reaction to it. To get at the thing without gestures is to get at it as idea. She floats in the contention, the flux between the thing as idea and the idea as thing. She is half who made her. The arrangement contains the desire of the artist, but one confides in what has no concealed creator. One walks easily the unpainted shore, accepts the world as anything but sculpture.
Isn't that amazing?
It's Hilton. It's you, right? I mean, isn't that what you're doing?
Yes, I agree with you, Al, that that he has such an enormous love for process of intellection, but also what inspires the process of intellection. So it's the model, it's Key West, it's a bird, it's a cloud, it's many things that he is celebrating in his poetry, and in particular that poem. To get it past gesture is a profound thing, where he can, he's saying without theater, without acting, without projecting, to get at it without the filigree of physical behavior and the person just being, I think was something that he longed for, and I longed for it too, to get past the veils of your mind, and really inhabit another person.
That's beautiful. And I think you sometimes use the word care in play instead of love, which is a big word. Sometimes you talk about this as care. So if the subject cares for the object is actually a subject, and intersubjectivity is a form of mutuality and love. But
Right.
it depends on caring.
That's right.
Okay, so Basquiat, Jean-Michel Basquiat and Mrs. Vreeland, so-called, take a trip to Puerto Rico so that he can get some time to paint. And he paints a canvas you admire, and he leaves it out on the balcony, and it begins to rain. And someone, he or she, I don't remember, this is also in Tristram, she rescues it, I guess.
Yes.
And you say, I love art. The artist wouldn't mind getting disappeared.
Yes.
That's such a great statement. I wonder if you would comment on it. And also, I think it applies to you, which is why I asked the question.
I think one of the reasons that I used to, or I think one of the reasons I love magazines was that it was like conceptual art to me, that the piece would happen and then it would disappear. That the magazine would, you know, people would say, "Oh, I didn't see that," or I didn't have that issue," or all of those things that people say were fascinating to me because you had put, let's say, a month, 6 weeks work into something very intensely, and then it would disappear. That was something that was very, very interesting to me. And now I think as I rapidly encroach my decrepitude, I see the importance and the value of books, because it means that you are accessible to people whenever they can get to it. I mean, that's the value of it, and that's what's so beautiful about this new stage of my writing life, is that I'm interested in the permanence of things. What if we didn't have this Wallace Stevens, to have to go through 50,000 copies of Poetry Magazine to find things? And I don't think that that's my intention anymore. I think my intention is to be seen now. It used to be not being seen.
Is it possible, Hilton, and forgive me for adding the familial and psychological dimension to this, just say no if you don't want to go there, but I don't think it's decrepitude or you turned 60 last year. I don't think it's that. I think it's what you said last night, and also with the students, about some realizations you're having, and
Yes.
and getting, I don't mean getting past as in solving problems, but being ready to write about the family drama and dynamic from a further view.
Yes.
When you were deep into that, ephemerality was a way of hiding. It was a form of invisibility. It was a way of having others like your ma, who could have been a writer, I guess you said a couple of times, and your sister, and that you turned out to be, they are the muse, and you turned out to be writing for them. All that stuff about appearance and disappearance. And in a way, ephemerality is psychologically an old way for you of dealing with that trauma.
Yes.
And maybe now you're okay with, I don't know, permanence is the wrong word. Nobody's really permanent, but putting things down that people will read forever.
Yes, I think that's incredibly insightful on your part, and it's a gift, really, what you just said, because it was a way of disappearing, right? Of not being seen. I think a lot of writers can't generalize. Every experience is different, but do you think, for instance, I'm not avoiding the question, but do you think, for instance, that Stevens was hiding in his day job? I think I think for sure that I've been hiding. And this is a period of great coming out. And I could have been 80 or I could have been 40, but it has to happen for the artist to fully inhabit being an artist, I think.
Yeah, and I think that a step along the way was the Alice Neal work.
Yes,
Alice Neal,
I
and
agree
you
with you,
conclude
Al.
you conclude with your dad again. But there you think, well, Alice Neal is a collectivist, and she was also a leftist, so we'll throw that in there. You know, someone who felt that she needed to paint the community as it was,
Mhm.
an inclusive community, you point out. And she could have painted your dad in a way that you probably wouldn't have wanted to. And the fact that she could have painted your dad makes you reconcile to a small degree with your dad, who you can imagine as part of Alice Neal's collective community.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's a
Yes,
big step forward.
I think that you feel that that's a step forward, Al?
I do. I just think you did something unusual, which is to help to curate the many painters of people of color, the many paintings of people of color, and then you imagine you projected your dad into that community.
To that gallery, yes.
Yeah, and
And do you think that, here's a question for you as a very profound professor, but have you seen in your teaching career those students who, before they can speak of themselves, do the work of interpreting other people?
yes, I do. I think I see how young people choose the writers and artists so that they can project themselves onto them without apologies.
Right,
And of course, they have to apologize at first because they have to get a grade on their writing and not Gertrude Stein's.
right.
But you've done that without apology from the start, I think. You know, Jamaica Kincaid, for instance, at using Jamaica to triangulate your memory of your mother
Yes,
as a great person of imagination.
yes.
Before we turn to a couple other questions from me, I want to pick up some nice things from people who are watching. I'll just read a few and you can answer any of them.
Sure.
Janice Orma, is it true that we live within social narratives? What narratives have you confronted in your life as a queer person? Caroline Rothstein, how did you come to cultivate your incredible specificity, your love of detail? Padmasini, who's in northern New Jersey, not that it matters in relation to the question, I just happen to know Padmasini, mentions how much she loves the final paragraph of My Mother's Dreams for her son. Mandana in New York, I'm so impressed that throughout your career, you've directed your incisive critical pen across many genres, literary, visual, performative. And one other, no, I think I'll leave it at that. Do you want to comment on any of those?
Sure. I think that the first question was about what have I confronted?
Yeah, we live within social narratives. What narratives have you confronted in your life as a queer person?
Oh, I think that the convergence of queer and race has been a huge issue for idiots out there in the world, and that has colored me, so to speak, for sure. The developing, the moving past the kind of wound that a lot of people have felt it was their right or to inflict. I think that has contributed greatly to my life and to my self-protectiveness. And in terms of my writing, I think as a lover of poetry, you can't get out of loving poetry without learning to be specific in your not only in your descriptions, but your philosophy, because poetry really is philosophy.
Mhm.
And I think that poets like Stevens and especially Marianne Moore had a big effect on me. And um,
Talk
um,
about specificity, Marianne Moore, holy cow.
yes, I think that she's um, had a huge effect on my being
Mm.
a writer.
You often talk about the language of X, the language of Y, being as important as X or Y. And a great example is when Dick Cavett turns to James Baldwin on television and tries to ask a question about whether Baldwin is hopeful about racial justice and so forth. It's a question of an ally, but it's so stumblingly asked that Baldwin goes into one of his brilliant sermonettes, and then you say, oh, I think it's actually you're quoting Baldwin. You summarize as follows: what's going to happen in this country if it can't cope with the language of race,
Right,
let alone race itself?
right.
And those of us who don't know how to work with the language are kind of doomed to have to work only with the content of the problems that we face rather than the way we describe them. That seems to be a hallmark of your
That's
work.
right. That if you can't face dismantling the language, you can't face yourself, because we are language and feeling and action. And if you can't tell the truth about that feeling or the love or the hatred or the oppression or marginalization, then you can't really discuss being a full or whole person. You're leaving something out if you don't do it. And I think what Baldwin was trying to describe in that moment, if I remember correctly, is how love cannot be exhausted as long as it's fed. And if you're not feeding love, then why wouldn't it erupt into violence or protest or burning cars, etc.? Love has to be fed, and I think he's talking about a kind of lack of spiritual and lack of spiritual nourishment from the country toward vis-a-vis people of color in particular.
Yeah, no, it's so great that you point out something Baldwin did habitually, which is he listens to the way a question is asked and he reacts to the language of that as much as to the topic. And it's just a great instance of it that you point out. Hilton, with the students and I, just let's stipulate for people watching who don't know about the Writers House Fellows program, its centerpiece is a seminar of undergraduates. And we've been reading Hilton's work been reading your work for the last 5 weeks intensely. We had a 45-minute conversation about a passage from the women from the first section of it, in which I referred to it a few minutes ago, in which you read a story by Jamaica Kincaid, and then knowing your mother would appreciate it, you read it aloud to her.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked, it became anthemic for us as intellectuals. We talked so much about why your mom understood exactly what Jamaica was saying about Barbados. Well, actually, she was thinking about Barbados. Mm-hmm. Kincaid was thinking about, I guess, Anguilla. And why it was so important for you to see your mother say that Kincaid had gotten it exactly right.
Well, I think it's also, as I think about it now, Al, I think it was a way of expressing an experience I didn't have, right?
That's right.
But that my mother had and Jamaica had. And it was a way of saying, I wish I could write this for you, but someone wrote it. So it was, so the thing that is really very interesting is how we find the language that we need to express things before we can express things. And reading Jamaica in the New Yorker was such an event in that magazine, you know? And then there was the actual stories that she was telling were stories like Paul Marshall's Brown Girl Brownstones that I couldn't tell for her to my mother, but they mattered to her.
Mm.
And I recognized that when I read the stories.
Yeah. Exactly means one, yes, Jamaica said it perfectly. Two, Hilton, my son, you're so right thinking that I would appreciate this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's a third and a fourth meaning of exactly.
And three is the self-generated hope that I'll write stories.
Yeah.
Matter, you know?
Yeah. And fourth is your mom, I represent the imagination. Your dad represents fact, which you get to in that passage. Leaving that aside, I am the imagination. You're going to do the work that I can't. I'm not a writer, but you're my son. Thank you for bringing me Jamaica.
That's right.
I wonder if you could read, of course, we've just talked about it a lot, so maybe there's not much left, but it's such a beautiful passage, Hilton. Maybe
what page is it?
It's 21 of the women. And I wonder if you could read, actually, it's that long paragraph that ends with your mother saying exactly, It starts on 21.
She loved the ocean. She didn't return to Barbados until shortly before she died, but the Caribbean Sea was the subject of her conversation from time to time. Summers, my brother and I were sent to Barbados with packages of clothes and food as gifts. From time to time, the girl children of cousins and aunts she hadn't seen for years came to stay with us. My brother and I didn't like Barbados, but we loved our mother and preferred to imagine the island through her memories of it. In 1978, when I was 17, I read a story by a writer from the West Indies. The story, Wingless, had been written by Jamaica Kincaid. In it, I read this description of the Caribbean Sea and its surroundings. Quote, the sea, the shimmering pink-colored sand, the swimmers with hats, two people walking arm in arm, talking in each other's faces, in each other's face, dots of water landing on noses, the sea spray on ankles, on overdeveloped calves, the blue, the green, the black, so deep, so smooth, the great and swift undercurrent, glassy, the white wavelets, unquote. This story changed everything. It taught me how language could be made visual and how memory combined with the imagination made the visual resonate. After I read this story, I read it aloud to my mother as she sat before me dying. After I read it, my mother said, exactly.
Holy shit. It's all there, I think.
Yeah.
Including you prefer to imagine, Hilton. That's like, sorry to be planning your epitaph, but that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? He preferred to imagine.
Yes. Yes.
And,
I mean,
and your mother was witness to your preference.
Yes. I wonder, Al, if what you're asking me in a way is, am I headed toward writing fiction?
Well, either that or the somewhere halfway between Prior's Love and You and What Army.
Yes.
Is a genre never invented yet.
Okay, so then I'm doing it for you, Al.
Oh, man.
Yes, you're a total inspiration. I'm going to take your course.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
I just love how your brother and you don't like the island. You don't like Barbados. And rather than turning that into a difference between you and your mom, it turns into a connection that makes you a writer. That is fucking amazing.
Well, it's one way in which you get to, isn't it? It's harder to turn things around than it is to say you hate them.
Yeah.
Or to disclaim or to reject.
Yeah.
It's much more difficult to say, what is it? And where can I find
right.
connection to someone I love through it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to turn it into a positive. First, your mother essentially, you say, this is not me saying, this is you saying, essentially killed herself slowly, and tired out of being so communitarian for everybody.
Mhm.
So you saw her disappearing, and you decided that Jamaica could help you create exactitude between you, exactly.
Right. And also, don't we find the writers that we need? It did change everything to read her in that magazine because um, it was one of the first times that a story was something that I could recognize, you know, from a world that I understood or knew something about, certainly, or recognized. And I think that's a great service when you can write in a way that gives folks their own language.
Is it possible to say, without too much exaggeration, that you followed Jamaica Kincaid into the New Yorker?
Um, no, they're other people. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
But symbolically, anyway.
oh, she's so great. You want to follow her anywhere, you know. Uh, I don't think it's just that. I think it's that um, she was very brave.
Yeah.
You know?
Um,
And
I
is
have,
very brave, I should say.
yeah, I have two more questions for you, but first let's turn to a couple folks who are watching on YouTube. I'll pose both questions, and you can pick one or both to talk about. Alan and Judy Norman, of the aforementioned folks who are in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. It's very late there now.
Yes.
And they, by the way, are both doctors, and they're both doing incredible frontline COVID work in
Thank you,
Cambodia.
guys. Wow. Thank
Aren't
you.
they? Yeah, it's amazing. And they really should be asleep because they have a big day tomorrow. Should be 2 tomorrows for us. I'll read what Judy writes, and we'll figure out what the question is. Quoting you, get past the veil in your, this is quoting you today, get past the veil in your mind and really inhabit the other person, care about them, unquote. In using language for care, have you explored other languages? And she's referring to globally, I think, other languages and cultures with collective, the idea of collective mood and collective personality. Big question. Let me go to the other one you can pick. This is from Allison Del Pino, the student you met yesterday. Allison asks, the one who's in Miami, to wade in ambiguity, to be forever suspect of binaries, seems to be an important takeaway from your work. That kind of openness isn't easy, though. You are necessarily lost because you've rejected beaten paths as limiting and inadequate. As an artist, what practice or practices do you consider essential? She's asking for advice to sustaining critical thinking that cuts through the binaries and inhabits this space of ambiguity.
I'll answer the second question first, and then I'll go to the first question. I think that the primary responsibility for the writer is to understand that you do not belong to anything, and to cut through is your job. One of the ways that you do that is to not believe or trust the idea that you can, through conventional gestures, whether that's marriage or kids or whatever, belong to society as the status quo as a whole, because you're outside of it. You're always standing outside of it because you're observing and you're commenting on, and you're also commenting on the ways in which that world affects you. So in order to have a proper dialogue with yourself, which is ultimately what the writer is drawing on, is that self, you cannot belong to any impulse that says the binary is correct, or that a dominant language is correct, or culture is correct. It's not your job. Your job is to be outside of it and to comment and be in dialogue with yourself about what you have observed. That's your job. So it's not a problem really to say what I think, because it's my job to do that. And as to the first question, I'm very moved by it, and I'm very ashamed to say that I haven't really lived widely in the world. And one of the things that I really would treasure greatly is the opportunity to come to some place like Cambodia, or to go to some place like to go to Southeast Asia in general, and have the experience that I've read about. Meaning, I've read about Cambodia, I've read about Vietnam, but I've yet to have the first person experience of that culture and that world. And especially now, while there's so much anti-Asian awfulness in this country, I would love to come as an American and be triply humbled by the poetry and the ferocity of those societies. That takes a lot. If you're, let's say, in Vietnam, and there are the French, the English, the Americans come and try to disrupt, decimate a people who will not give up their identity. That's a powerful thing. Those are big empires, and to not give up is something that I have to see, and I would love to be a part of it one day. It's like going to Ireland. You know, you have to go to Ireland because, again, it was a small place that was not discouraged by empire. That's part of my work as a writer, to see it and to hear those voices.
Thanks to Alan.
Thank you for writing from so far away.
Yes,
very
Alan and
touched.
Judy Norman. Yeah, thank you. So to my final two questions then, they both entail asking you to read briefly from your work. First, and this may connect with what you just said about the Irish and the Vietnamese. My favorite piece, for what it's worth, in White Girls is the concluding piece. It will soon be here. I have to say that I still struggle with understanding what it is and also here. So 2 out of the 5 words in the title baffle me in the most generative way.
It's a reference to a painting, and the painting is a visual metaphor that Truman Capote was going to use when he was going to write a report on the Rolling Stones on tour. And he said it was a painting of farm families gathering against the storm.
Wow.
And so I was just borrowing it. I was sort of writing for Truman a little bit, the piece that he couldn't finish.
Wow. Okay, I'm edified. That's great. I said yesterday that I felt that the wall, and folks are about to hear it because I'm going to ask you to read the first couple of paragraphs, but the idea of the wall, which surrounds memory, keeps us from the traumatic X we can't say, the unspeakable. It keeps us hunkered down. It's a very generative metaphor.
Yeah.
And I think I said yesterday that I felt that the person who wrote that piece was a survivor, or at least understands how survivors speak and write. And I guess that's all I'm going to say before asking you to read it, but maybe you want to say something before you read the couple paragraphs about that wall.
I think the wall is resistance. And it is the wall that we put up to separate us from experience, especially if it's painful.
And how great at the end, which we won't read, where you decide to write your name, or you imagine writing one's name on the wall.
Yes.
Which is, I keep thinking about Baldwin's Nobody Knows My Name, that collection of essays, which includes contemplations indirectly and directly about his father, his hatred of his father, and also feeling unnamed and unnameable. And you talked yesterday about that.
Longing to be loved by his father.
And longing to be loved by his father, and having some ongoing relationship with his father's version of religion. And you talked yesterday about not being able to name your father. So this is a big issue, and you're dealing with it directly and beautifully in this piece. It will soon be here.
Thank you.
Would you mind reading the first couple paragraphs?
I don't mind at all.
Okay.
Anything for you, Al.
Oh, thank you.
The wall surrounding memory, this piece is called It Will Soon Be Here. The wall surrounding memory, misremembered, is clean and wide and high, similar in effect to the wall one finds in certain airports in other countries. Clean and wide and high like that, banking in or letting go those who want to remember clearly or don't. Passengers coming or going in the field of memory are a tangle of arms and legs, hands, hearts, hair, and minds that, if you do not stand too close or listen too carefully, speak a shared language. Remarkable in its oppressive loneliness, its denial. What a horrible memory, and so forth. Regardless of where many of us believe we land, in that field encumbered by not too much baggage or entirely too much, we all come from the same place, which is a road rutted by experience, so banal, nearly remarkable, that the memory tricks us into remembrance of it again and again, as if experience alone were not enough. What are we to do with such a life, one in which we are not left alone to events, love, shopping, and so forth, but to the holocaust of feeling that memory, misremembered or not, imposes on us? Against that wall, which is clean and wide and high, we fall disastrously at times, when we can no longer be quite the fascist-minded custodians of our own past that we'd like to be, as in, I don't remember, I can't, and so forth. In censoring our past, we censor ourselves, a not remarkable observation, nor is the idea that the will to censorship begins, like some weird music, in the home, heard most acutely by the children, or the queer children someone's mother must have loved most. Not remembering or misremembering one's childhood is a way of allowing oneself the notion that the past does not exist, that it was not lived through in quite that way, that somehow it did not make one different than the rest, as in, I was the one in hellish bliss, wearing my mother's garters behind the closed door, not being a boy, or I was in my childhood bed with her, and our legs were entwined, and young ladies are supposed to keep their legs away from one another and closed, and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Holocaust of feeling. Can you help me and us with that question? What are we to do with such a life, one in which we are not left alone to events, love, shopping, and so forth, but to the Holocaust of feeling that memory, misremembered or not, imposes on us?
Yes. I think I'm talking about destruction and about the ways in which we try to avoid this great wave of consciousness that sweeps in on us when we remember. And if we remember, then we have to be responsible for our part in the memory of the story. And I think that life is, if you try to sort of wall that out, or if you try to control it, I think, and repression can only lead to eruptions of feeling that are chaotic. And so what I'm talking about is how we often feel that memory is a chaotic enterprise that needs to be controlled, when in fact it's the thing that makes us. It's that wonderful line in Long Day's Journey into Night, when the husband, James Tyrone, says to Mary, his wife, "Can't you forget the past?" And she says, "Why? It's the present and the future too."
Mm. So that destruction is somewhat necessary, the Holocaust of feeling, and it's regardless of whether the memory is misremembered or accurately remembered. Hilton, this converges remembering, accurately remembering, and misremembering. It puts that all on one side.
Yes.
It's an amazing passage. Are we allowed to interpret it will soon be here separate from Truman's, the nod to Truman?
Yes. I just like the story of the painting. I like the title.
Your readers can do nothing but think about it otherwise, unless they're really deep inside the Truman reference.
Yes.
And I just love that. I don't know what to do with it, but I love it. It will soon be here is almost a therapeutic statement. Like,
yes, and it's right, exactly, that you're getting to the that memory is something that can be viewed as an assault. That it's something that you're powerless against.
Right. And here, this transitions to my final
yourself.
question.
Yes.
Yeah, it's yourself, but also for your readers, Hilton, who, whether we are wrestling with the traumas of the past that produce horrible memories or not, we are reading this as the coda to this book. And I love this as a coda. It will soon be here. Like, you're reading the end of this book, but there's a here. The words on the page, not ephemeral, but permanent. It's a book published by Penguin. It'll be in print forever, let's hope. And we're always going to be here. We're always going to be here when we encounter that it will soon be here. You're doing some therapy on behalf of us, I think, in a way. So finally, that leads us to the last question, and it's again pertains to a passage I'm hoping you'll read, and Lily sent you the link to that a while back. We made a JPEG of the final paragraph of really my favorite or second favorite of the recent pieces you've published in the New Yorker about the two sister poets, Ntozake Shange and your own sister. And there's a scene, the final paragraph has a here in it, I think, and it pertains to the memory of that your sister reports to you as she's dying, of your mother giving her white pearls for her 16th birthday and the feeling she has. So I wondered if you would read it, and then we'll talk about it for a second at the end to end off.
Sure. Before my sister died, she would tell me stories about our family and about herself. She was an emotionally shy and private person and so lacked Shange's boldness, but that didn't make her any less of a poet. And sometimes as she talked, I remembered the girl she had been, beautiful and thin, playing handball in East New York with the guys in her pencil skirt, combing out the hair that Lily in Spell Number 7 could only dream of, dancing to salsa with a Puerto Rican boyfriend. One story my sister told me, when she turned 16, our mother gave her, as our mother had for her other 3 daughters, a string of pearls to celebrate, virginal white pearls. My sister said that she was struck by the contrast between her hot flesh and the pearls. And as she talked, I wrote it down because she couldn't. but in a way, she did write it down. I was merely transcribing her poem, what she felt and remembered, just as Shangay transcribed what she felt and remembered, living as she did, between the body that she was given and what she made of it, along with that mind, which was filled with so many stories that we'll spend the next forever trying to catch up.
Thank you, Hilton. In a way, she did write it down because we're reading it now.
Yes.
So I think we're kind of back to so-and-so reclining on her couch, and the idea of the intersubjectivity of the person who inspires you and you as an artist.
That's right.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Hilton. Thank you for, I hope people realize that someone as busy and eminent as you to take time to do almost 3 hours with students and then a reading and then this conversation, it's a big deal. And I don't take it for granted in the least.
Well, Al, this has been one of the great recent experiences, I must say. I'm very honored and touched and nourished by your company. Thank you. And by the students.
Thank you so much.
Don't lose touch, okay?
I'm not going to lose touch. I want to thank everybody, Hilton most of all, and Lily and Zach, and everybody who tuned in. Last night's recording will not be available as a recording because it's new work, but this will be available. So pass it along to your friends and be prepared for Hilton Als' new book, which is a year from now. Maybe, right?
Yeah, probably.
And we do have a title for it.
I don't remember.
I don't remember, which is like so pertinent to what we've been talking about. Hilton, have a great day and a great week. And I know we'll be in touch and bring you to the writer's house.
Take care, Al.
All right, bye-bye.